Wife sold my family's diamond wedding ring to buy luxury goods. Now she's paying the price. I never imagined that that ordinary morning would change the course of my life forever. I, Brian, 29 years old, was organizing some documents when I noticed that something important was missing from the jewelry box in our master suite. My wife Emma's, 27-year-old, wedding ring wasn't where it should have been, a detail that seemed small but sent a pit in my stomach that I can't explain to this day. It wasn't just any ring, but a rare piece with a Victorian design, set with diamonds and a platinum band that had been passed down through 3 generations in my family. My great-grandmother received this ring when she got married in 1923, and since then, each firstborn in the family has worn it to seal their marriage commitment. Emma knew perfectly well the history of that ring and the incalculable sentimental value it held for our family. When I asked about the missing ring, Emma looked at me with a disturbing calm that I will never forget. With a coolness that seemed rehearsed, she confessed that she had sold the ring to a renowned jeweler in downtown Boston. According to her, the old-fashioned design didn't match her more contemporary style, and she preferred to use the money to invest in designer accessories that really represented her. As she described the 3 international brand handbags and a set of fashionable jewelry she had purchased with the money, I felt as if the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I couldn't process what I was hearing. It was as if a stranger was standing in front of me, wearing the face of the woman I had chosen to share my life with just 6 months earlier. What shocked me most was not just the act itself, but the absolute lack of regret. Emma maintained an unwavering stance as she explained her logic for the situation, that since we were married, the ring technically belonged to her, and she had every right to do whatever she wanted with her own assets. To her, this was just a commercial transaction, a simple exchange of an outdated item for more desirable ones. There was no recognition of the emotional or historical value of that piece, the deep connection it represented between generations of my family, or the importance it had for me personally. It was as if all the times I had shared stories about my grandmother and great-grandmother wearing that same ring at their weddings had never happened. An explosive argument broke out in our apartment that afternoon. Words I never thought we would exchange were launched like projectiles, deeply hurting each other. I desperately asked her to reverse the sale, return the luxury items, and get the ring back before my 92-year-old grandmother found out what had happened. The thought of my grandmother knowing that the ring that symbolized the lasting love between her and my late grandfather had been exchanged for leather bags caused me indescribable anguish. But Emma remained adamant, claiming that she would not return her purchases and that, if the ring was so important, I could buy it back from the jeweler myself. Those words revealed a side of her that I had never seen before, a callousness that seemed incompatible with the woman I had fallen in love with. With the feeling of betrayal coursing through my veins, I packed just the essentials in a small suitcase and left the apartment without looking back. It was as if that discussion had ripped away the veil of the fantasy I had built about our relationship, revealing a painful truth that I could no longer ignore. I found refuge in a hotel on the outskirts of the city, naively hoping that Emma would realize the seriousness of what she had done and seek me out to resolve the situation. I spent 2 full days checking my phone constantly, hoping to see a missed message or call that would indicate regret, but her silence was deafening and, in some ways, more revealing than any words I could say. When I finally accepted that there would be no spontaneous reconciliation, I sought professional help. After talking to some friends who had gone through complicated divorces, I was able to contact a lawyer who specialized in family law. The initial meeting was devastating. Verbalizing that my marriage was falling apart after just 6 months made the reality become inescapably concrete. As the lawyer explained the next steps, I signed the preliminary papers with a mixture of sadness and determination. It wasn't just the ring that had been lost, but all the trust and respect that formed the foundation of what we thought we had built together. On the 3rd day after consulting the lawyer, I made a decision that would definitely change the course of our history. With divorce papers in hand and a few trusted friends by my side, I returned to the apartment at a time when I knew Emma would be at work. With a methodical efficiency that I didn't even know I possessed, we removed every single belonging of mine from that space that I had called home for so long. Pictures, books, clothes, electronic equipment, everything that belonged to me was carefully packed and transported to temporary storage at a friend's house. When we were done, I left the divorce papers strategically placed on the living room coffee table. As I closed the door for the last time, I felt a mixture of liberation and deep melancholy. An important chapter in my life was closing in a way I never could have predicted. The silence that followed that afternoon was abruptly interrupted by a flurry of messages and calls from Emma's parents. The notifications started appearing on my cell phone around 6:30 in the afternoon, at which time I assumed she had returned from work and found the apartment partially empty and the divorce papers. The messages ranged from emotional pleas for me to reconsider my decision to accusations that I was being overly drastic for something as small as a ring. That minimization of what had happened only reinforced my certainty that I was making the right decision. How could they call something small that carried the history and memory of so many generations of my family? It was at that moment that I decided to block not only Emma, but all of her family members in my contacts. The reaction of those close to Emma didn't stop there. The next day, messages began to arrive from her closest friends, all following a clearly orchestrated narrative. They claimed that I was being impulsive and selfish, and that Emma was devastated by my reaction. The most interesting detail in these messages was the information that, supposedly, Emma had contacted the jeweler immediately after our fight to try to get the ring back, feeling genuinely sorry. This carefully constructed story left me intrigued. If she really was trying to get the ring back out of sincere regret, why hadn't she contacted me directly to let me know? The answer to that question arrived a few days later, in a way I could never have anticipated. Determined to resolve the ring situation regardless of the status of my marriage, I contacted the jeweler using the information Emma had provided me during our discussion. The man, a professional with decades of experience in the business, confirmed that Emma had indeed been in touch about the possibility of reacquiring the ring, but had stopped responding to his messages in recent days. The most interesting revelation, however, came when he casually mentioned that the ring was being competed for by two buyers, me and Emma, and that he would sell it to whoever came up with the asking price first. The price he quoted was considerably higher than what he had bought it for from Emma, but I was willing to pay any amount to get this family heirloom back. Negotiating with the jeweler was an exhausting experience. As an experienced businessman, he sensed my desperation and used it to his advantage in negotiations. The ring was displayed in the window of his store, available to any customer willing to pay the asking price. There was no reservation or priority policy for cases like mine. Every time I visited the store to negotiate, I felt overwhelming anxiety imagining that someone might buy the ring before I could raise the necessary amount. It was a race against time that cost me not only money, but also a huge emotional toll. After several days of negotiation, we finally managed to reach an agreement on the price, and I set a date to finalize the purchase. During this entire process, I kept my family completely unaware of what was happening. My grandmother, especially, could not have known that the ring that symbolized her 5-decade marriage had been sold as if it were just another disposable accessory. I made up excuses to explain why Emma wasn't answering calls and why we weren't home. This part was particularly painful, lying to people I loved to protect them from a truth that would likely hurt them deeply. Every call from my mother casually asking how we were was like a little needle in the heart, reminding me of everything I had lost and how much our family still didn't know. The situation with the ring was finally resolved when, after much effort, I managed to raise the necessary amount for its repurchase. It was a bittersweet feeling when I finally had that century-old piece back in my hands. On the one hand, I felt immense relief at having recovered something so important to my family history. On the other, every time I looked at those diamonds that had witnessed so many stories of lasting love, I was reminded of how my own love had disintegrated in just 6 months. The contrast between what that ring represented, commitment, tradition, permanence, and what my marriage had become was painfully ironic. After retrieving the ring, I knew I could no longer put off having the difficult conversation with my family. I decided to visit my parents in their quiet Massachusetts suburb to finally reveal what had happened. I prepared them in advance, mentioning that we needed to talk about something important, and included my grandmother in the conversation via video call. Their reaction to the full story was a mix of shock and sadness. My grandmother, with her wisdom from 9 decades of life, was visibly shaken, but she also demonstrated surprising strength. As I held up the recovered ring in my hands, she commented something that would forever be etched in my memory. The ring found its way back to the family, as it should. Some people, unfortunately, are not meant to be part of our story. The days that followed were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. As I tried to adapt to my new reality as a man about to get divorced before even completing a year of marriage, I immersed myself in work as a form of escape. The extra hours at the architecture firm where I work in Boston served as a welcome distraction from the emotional issues I wasn't yet ready to fully process. When I wasn't working, I dedicated my time to looking for a new apartment, something I could truly call my own. Staying at the hotel was becoming financially unsustainable, especially after the substantial investment I had made to get the family ring back. It was a week of touring properties, reviewing contracts, and negotiating with landlords. Mundane tasks that, paradoxically, brought some sense of normalcy amidst the chaos of my personal life. Concentration on the practical issues of life was working as an efficient emotional shield until that unexpected call. It was an unknown number on the cell phone display, and I answered it out of reflex, without imagining that I would hear Emma's voice on the other end of the line. The impact of hearing that familiar voice after weeks of separation left me momentarily paralyzed. As she spoke, I remained completely silent, unable to articulate any response. Emma didn't apologize as I perhaps secretly hoped. Instead, he expressed a desire for one last meeting to hand over the signed divorce papers in person and have a final conversation to set the record straight. When he finished speaking, he simply hung up, leaving me with that request hanging in the air like an unanswered question. I spent the whole night debating internally whether or not I should attend this meeting. On the one hand, there was something tempting about the idea of getting some kind of closure, of hearing what she had to say after everything that had happened. On the other hand, I questioned whether reopening that wound, which was still so recent, would be wise for my emotional recovery process. The next morning, I made my decision. I would find her, not for her, but for me. I needed this closure to move forward, and the prospect of receiving the divorce papers directly would make the legal process easier. With that resolution in mind, I drove to what had been our shared home, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and determination rising inside me. The apartment was almost unrecognizable when I entered. Most of the furniture remained, as the property was rented furnished, but there was a palpable emptiness that went beyond the physical absence of my belongings. Emma waited sitting on the living room sofa, holding a folder with documents and an envelope. Our meeting was marked by a painful formality, as if we were two strangers conducting a business transaction rather than a couple who had promised to spend their entire lives together just 6 months earlier. She handed me the duly signed divorce papers and, to my complete surprise, also handed me a check. Upon checking the value, I realized it was a significant amount, not the full amount I paid for the ring, but certainly a substantial portion of it. At my confused expression, Emma explained that she had returned all the luxury items she had purchased with the money from the ring sale. The amount on the check represented the refund you got from those returns. I informed her that the amount I paid the jeweler was considerably more, and she, to my surprise, committed to covering the difference in monthly installments over the next few months. That gesture, although late, was an acknowledgment of the mistake he had made. She admitted that this money was the most she could offer at the moment, but she was determined to fully compensate for the financial loss she had caused me. I accepted the check with a brief thank you, not knowing exactly how to process this unexpected change in attitude. It was then that I witnessed something I had never seen before in our relationship. Emma crying openly, without trying to hide or control her emotions. Through tears, she finally apologized. These were not elaborate excuses or complex justifications, but a sincere acknowledgement that I had made a terrible mistake that cost us our marriage. She confessed that in the weeks since my departure, she had felt deep and constant regret, but fear of rejection prevented her from attempting direct reconciliation. On some level, she always knew she was wrong, regardless of what her friends and family said to comfort her. Emma concluded by saying that I deserved someone better, someone who respected my values and family history, and that's why she accepted divorce as the right decision, no matter how painful it was. When she finished speaking, she walked away towards the bedroom without waiting for a response from me. I stood there, standing in the middle of the room, trying to process everything I had just heard. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the distant sound of Emma tidying up some things in the room. I sat down on the couch, the same one where we had spent so many nights watching movies and planning our future, and allowed the tears I had held back for weeks to finally fall. I stayed like that for almost half an hour, simply letting my emotions flow freely, until I heard the sound of Emma's car pulling away in the garage. That sound of the engine moving away seemed to perfectly symbolize the definitive closure of that chapter of my life. I left the apartment with a strange feeling of lightness and melancholy. The next day, I deposited the check and informed my lawyer about the signed documents. There was nothing left to be discussed or negotiated. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the necessary legal period for the divorce to be made official. Part of me expected to feel some kind of satisfaction or vindication with this outcome, but the reality was much more complex. The relief of having recovered the ring and part of the money was mixed with the sadness at the loss of a relationship that I once believed would be forever. I realized there were no winners in this story, just two people who would go their separate ways, both carrying invisible scars from that brief time shared. The first few weeks in my new apartment were an exercise in rediscovery. Located in a historic neighborhood in Cambridge, the space was considerably smaller than the apartment I shared with Emma, but there was something comforting about the simplicity and the idea of a place that was all my own, free from shared memories or dashed expectations. The task of decorating and organizing the apartment became almost therapeutic. Every decision, from choosing the color of the walls to the arrangement of the furniture, was exclusively mine, a small act of autonomy that helped rebuild my identity as an individual, no longer as part of a couple. My friends were extraordinary during this process, not only helping with the physical move, but also filling my days with invitations to dinners, games, and activities that kept me socially connected at a time when it would be easy to isolate myself. The family ring found its place in a small safety box that I installed in my closet. Occasionally, I would pick it up and examine the century-old piece, reflecting on how something seemingly material could carry so much symbolic meaning. During a visit to my parents' house, my grandmother made a point of sharing stories about the ring that I had never heard before, how my great-grandfather had saved for 2 years to buy that specific piece, or how during the Great Depression, my great-grandmother turned down numerous offers to sell it, even in times of greatest financial hardship. These stories gave even more depth to the meaning of that family heirloom and confirmed that all the effort to recover it had been worth it, regardless of the emotional and financial cost. At work, I dove head first into a major restoration project of a historic building in downtown Boston. The complexity and challenges of that work required total concentration and creativity, serving as a welcome escape for my restless mind. My boss, noticing my renewed commitment to the profession, offered me a leadership position on the project, an opportunity that a few months ago I probably would have turned down due to a lack of confidence. The irony was not lost on me. While my personal life seemed to fall apart, my career was blossoming like never before. Maybe it was true what they say about growth coming through adversity, although I certainly would have preferred to learn that lesson in a less painful way. News about Emma occasionally came through mutual friends, even if I never asked directly. I learned that she had moved to Chicago to accept a job offer at a digital marketing company, an opportunity one had vaguely mentioned during our marriage but never seemed like a concrete possibility. Part of me wondered if this drastic change was a way for her to also seek a new beginning, away from the memories and social judgment she certainly faced in our community. I felt no anger when I thought of her now, just a gentle melancholy and the sincere hope that she, too, would find her path to healing and growth, just as I was trying to find mine. The months passed surprisingly quickly, and before I knew it, the divorce was officially finalized. I received the email notification while working in the office on a regular Tuesday. I paused for a moment, contemplating the meaning of that formal document that represented the definitive closure of an important chapter in my life. There was no drama, no big emotions, just the quiet realization that I was now officially a divorced man at 29, something I had never considered as part of my life plan. That same night, I received one last message from Emma through a number I hadn't blocked. It was brief, just expressing sincere wishes for happiness in my future and a final request for forgiveness. I responded with equal brevity, wishing her the best and acknowledging that, despite everything, I hoped she found peace. That final exchange of messages brought a sense of closure I didn't know I still needed. I realized that although the pain of betrayal remained, the acute resentment I had felt in the early days had turned into something closer to acceptance. What happened between us couldn't be erased or rewritten, but it also didn't need to define the rest of my life. As I planned my next steps, including a 2-week Pacific Coast road trip with 2 close friends, I felt a mix of nostalgia for what could have been and genuine excitement for what was yet to come. It was as if I was at a turning point, simultaneously looking at the past with new understanding and the future with renewed hope. In the weeks leading up to the trip, I reorganized my personal and professional affairs so I could completely disconnect during that period. The project at work was at a good time for me to take a leave of absence, and my teammates were prepared to continue without my direct supervision. At home, I left the family ring in the care of my parents, feeling it was the right time to not carry that symbol with me for a while. I needed space to breathe without the constant weight of memories and responsibilities, even ones I had voluntarily chosen. When the day of departure finally arrived, I felt an almost childlike anticipation, as if I was about to turn to a blank page, where a new story could begin to be written. As our plane took off, watching Boston gradually diminish until it was just a cluster of distant lights, I reflected on the unexpected journey I had been on over the past few months. From a recent and seemingly promising marriage to a painful divorce and the subsequent rebuilding of my life, it had all occurred in a surprisingly short space of time. Still, I felt stronger, more confident in my ability to face adversity, and clearer about my personal values and limits. As the clouds swallowed up the view of the city below, I smiled to myself, acknowledging that although the path there had been bumpy and unpredictable, I was genuinely curious and optimistic about where it would take me next. The Pacific Coast road trip turned out to be exactly what I needed, an interlude of natural beauty, adventure, and simplicity that helped restore my perspective on life. Our itinerary took us from Seattle to San Diego, with carefully planned stops at iconic sites like Redwood National Park and Big Sur. There was something deeply therapeutic about gazing at those giant sequoias, some more than 2,000 years old, and realizing how minuscule our personal dramas, however intense they may seem, are on the grand scale of time. The long walks along coastal trails, the nights of heartfelt conversation around beach bonfires, and the moments of solitude overlooking the vast Pacific Ocean created a mental space where I could process everything that had happened without the constant pressure of everyday life. My two friends, Josh and Marcus, provided the perfect balance of companionship and privacy, knowing when to engage in deep conversations and when to leave me to my own thoughts. Back in Boston, I felt rejuvenated and ready to fully embrace my new reality. The apartment in Cambridge, which previously seemed like just a temporary shelter, began to take on characteristics that truly reflected my personality. I invested in some local art, organized my extensive collection of architecture books into a custom bookshelf I designed and built with the help of a carpenter friend, and finally unpacked the family photographs I'd kept in storage since moving. Among them I placed a new addition, a framed photograph of the giant redwoods I had visited, a daily reminder of the perspective I had found during my trip. The routine I established was healthy and balanced, divided between challenging work that continued to evolve in exciting directions, time for hobbies I had neglected during my marriage, and meaningful connections with friends and family. The first time I went on a date after my divorce was a surprisingly positive experience. Rebecca, an art restorer I met during a historic preservation event related to my work, was smart, independent, and shared my interest in Boston history and architecture. Our conversation flowed naturally over dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, and I found I could talk about my marriage and divorce without the crushing emotional weight I had expected. I didn't mention specific details about the ring or the exact circumstances of the breakup, but I was honest about having gone through an experience that taught me a lot about myself and what I truly value in a relationship. Rebecca appreciated my candor and shared her own experiences with failed relationships, creating a space of mutual understanding that was comforting and hopeful. 6 months after the official divorce, I received an unexpected envelope in the mail. Inside was a check from Emma representing the last installment of the refund for the ring, along with a brief handwritten note. She reported that she had completed a therapy program that helped her understand her materialistic behavior patterns and the real value of emotional connections versus physical possessions. The note did not ask for reconciliation or even forgiveness. It was simply a final acknowledgement of the mistake he had made and an expression of gratitude for the life lesson, however painful it had been. That communication brought a strange sense of closure that I didn't know I still needed. I deposited the check, but kept the note in a box where I kept other important documents, not out of romantic sentimentality, but as a tangible reminder of a valuable lesson about the importance of shared values in any relationship. The seasons changed, and with the arrival of spring in Boston, I felt like I had finally fully moved through the period of mourning for my failed marriage. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, I took the family ring back to my grandmother's house, where we spent hours talking about her youthful memories and the nearly 60 years of marriage she shared with my grandfather. She held the ring in weathered hands, examining it in the light coming through the living room window. "You know, Brian," she said with that wisdom that only old age can bring, "this ring isn't just gold and diamonds. It's a testament that true love can weather the storms of life. Your grandfather and I have been through some tough times, but we've never lost respect for each other. The next finger this ring adorns needs to belong to someone who understands that." His words stayed with me, not as a burden or expectation, but as valuable guidance for the future. The first anniversary of my divorce passed almost unnoticed, marked only by silent reflection during my morning run along the Charles River. I thought about how drastically my life had changed in just 1 year. Professionally, he had been promoted to associate director of the architectural firm, with direct responsibility for historic preservation projects throughout New England. Personally, I had rebuilt a life that I genuinely enjoyed, with new friends, new interests, and a renewed sense of purpose. My relationship with Rebecca had evolved naturally into something meaningful, without rush or pressure. She understood the importance of family traditions in my life and had shown genuine respect for the ring's history when I casually mentioned it during one of our conversations. There were no immediate plans for remarriage, but for the first time since the divorce, I could imagine the possibility without feeling anxiety or fear. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of my journey was how something that initially seemed like the worst experience of my life ended up becoming a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Emma's betrayal of the family ring was painful beyond words, but it sparked a series of changes and decisions that, ironically, led me to a place of greater authenticity and happiness. I learned about my own limits, about the importance of shared values in relationships, and about my ability to recover in the face of adversity. As my mentor at the architecture firm often says about the historic buildings we restore, sometimes it is necessary to remove compromised structures to reveal the beauty and strength of the original foundation. That analogy seemed perfectly applicable to my own life experience. One particularly pleasant autumn afternoon, while organizing some old documents, I found the folder with the final divorce papers. For a moment, I contemplated those pages that officially marked the end of an important chapter in my life. I felt no anger, sadness, or regret, just a calm acceptance of the path I had taken. I decided it was time to permanently archive that chapter, not just metaphorically, but literally. I organized all of the divorce-related documents, including Emma's final note and ring recovery receipts, into a labeled folder and placed it in the highest part of the filing cabinet, where I would rarely need to see it. That simple symbolic act brought a sense of definitive closure, like closing a book after reading the last page. The following week, during a family dinner to celebrate my grandmother's 93rd birthday, I found myself observing the different generations gathered around the table: my parents, uncles, cousins, and their young children. There was a moment of crystal clarity when I realized that the true family wealth was not in the ring I had fought so hard to get back, but in the connections, stories, and shared values that bound us all together. The ring was just a tangible symbol of something much bigger and more precious: the legacy of love, respect, and integrity that had been passed down through the generations. This realization did not lessen the importance of having recovered the ring, but it put that experience in a broader and more meaningful perspective. What really mattered was not the jewel itself, but what it represented, and that was something no one could sell or buy. Today, as I write these words, it has been almost 2 years since that fateful morning when I realized the family ring was missing. The path since then has not been easy, but I can say with absolute sincerity that I am deeply grateful for every lesson learned along this unexpected journey. I learned that material goods, no matter how valuable they are, should never override the principles and values that define who we really are. I discovered that true strength lies not in never falling, but in the ability to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep walking with dignity and renewed purpose. You who have accompanied me this far have probably already faced your own storms in life. Perhaps you have also experienced the pain of betrayal, the anguish of seeing something precious devalued by someone you trusted completely. I want you to know that this pain, no matter how intense it is at the moment, does not define your final destination. The question I need to ask is, what are you allowing life's disappointments to do to your heart? Are they hardening you, making you cynical and suspicious? Or are they refining their character, clarifying their values, and strengthening their resilience? Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you decided to turn every obstacle into a stepping stone, every disappointment into a valuable lesson. What if, instead of holding on to resentment, you channeled that energy into building something new and meaningful? This is not a suggestion to ignore pain or pretend it doesn't exist. Rather, it is an invitation to feel fully, process honestly, and then move forward intentionally. What would happen if, as I did with my family ring, you decided to fight to regain not only what you lost, but also to rediscover who you truly are in the process? The truth is that we all carry our own family rings, be they physical objects, relationships, dreams, or values that we consider precious and non-negotiable. When these treasures are threatened or lost, we have a choice to make. We can surrender to despair, or we can turn that loss into a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. This is your life, your only life. Are you willing to let one painful chapter define your entire story? Or are you ready to pick up the pen and start writing the next chapter with courage and hope? If this story touched something inside you, if you saw yourself reflected in any aspect of my journey, know that you are not alone. There is an entire community of people who are going through or have gone through similar challenges, and who are here to support and inspire each other. Share your own experience in the comments below. What did you learn through the difficult times? What family rings did you have to fight to protect or recover? Your story could be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue this journey together. Each week, we explore real stories like this, seeking to extract the valuable lessons that can transform not just how we face adversity, but how we live each day with purpose and meaning. After all, life rarely follows the script we write for it, but it is precisely in unexpected detours that we often find our true direction. Until the next video, remember, your story is still being written, and the most inspiring chapters may be right in front of you.